I'm going to tell you something that still grabs me by the throat every time I think about it. A woman I loved like family was sent to prison for 15 years, with no fingerprints, no camera footage, no real investigation. And the people who did it smiled like they'd just straightened a crooked picture on the wall. If it were you, what would you have done? My name is Oliver. When this started, I was 8, small enough to be ignored, and just old enough to notice when adults start telling stories that don't match the facts. It was one of those perfect mornings, the kind rich houses are built to deliver. Fresh-cut grass, black cars gliding up the drive, kitchens humming, my father striding through the hallway like a general making inspection. Hand heavy on my shoulder, stand straight, son, investors notice everything. And then the moment that cracked the day in half. He opened the library door, walked to the glass case and froze. The gold pocket watch, his father's watch, the family symbol, the way he taught me that time was money and memory, gone. He called the staff. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. People lined up the way people do when their paycheck is attached to someone else's mood. Security with a tablet. Butler hands folded cooks in their whites, and the housekeeper's heads slightly down, because this felt like church and judgment mixed together. Who went into the library, he asked, and it sounded like a question, but felt like a verdict. Only one name came up. Emily, our maid, the woman who had a cookie ready for me after a bad day, who remembered cinnamon in my hot chocolate, without asking who knew where my missing Lego pieces crawled off to. She stepped forward, eyes steady and confused. I dusted like always. I didn't touch the case. I would never steal from this family. I believed her. You can hear the difference between fear and lying when you grow up around speeches. My father didn't. Or maybe he chose not to. It happened fast. Guards at the door, a phone call to the police, another to an old friend in a dark robe, Judge Howard. And by sundown we were in a courtroom that felt like a boardroom with wood paneling. Emily had a public defender who learned her name on the way in. No fingerprints, no footage, no witness. Just my father's story about legacy and betrayal, and a watch that meant more than gold. The judge listened like he'd heard this one at dinner last week, and liked the ending. Gavel tap, voice flat, guilty of grand theft, and then the number that hit like a truck. 15 years. 15. For dusting the wrong room at the wrong time. Have you ever felt a room go quiet in the wrong way? Not respectful, not sacred, just dead like truth walked out to get air and never came back. That's what floated over us as they brought Emily to her feet. She found me in the crowd, and I saw a look I'll never forget. Not rage, not even confusion, just the shock of being erased. We went home with the windows up, the way you do when you don't want the world to hear you breathing. My father poured a drink, told the staff to increase security, told me sometimes a leader has to make hard choices. I stared at the portrait of my grandfather and made a quiet choice of my own. I would start paying attention, even if no one liked where that attention landed. The next few days pretended to be normal. Gardeners clipping chefs, sautéing drivers, polishing chrome that could see its own reflection. But the house felt tilted. Doors closed too fast, whispers grew roots in back hallways, and Charlotte, my older sister, floated around like a shadow with a bandage on her hand she thought she'd hidden with a long sleeve. I noticed. Kids notice everything when nobody notices them. And then I overheard something. Not at home, but at a cottage with a porch that creaked like honesty. Yeah, I followed someone. Emily was allowed a short, supervised visit outside the prison. Some paperwork and errand. And she went to see a woman named Margaret, an old friend, ex-forensics, the kind of person who hears the word missing and automatically thinks chain of custody. I slipped off the transport van at the corner and walked the last block like legs were my only plan. I crouched under the open window because that's where the facts were, you know what I mean? Emily told her everything. The missing watch, the rushed trial, the judge who acted like he already knew the end. And then she mentioned something that made the whole afternoon lean forward. The white cloth that usually sat on top of the glass case, the one used to keep dust off the display. It had been there the day before. It was gone the morning the watch vanished. Margaret didn't move for a heartbeat. If someone handled the watch with that cloth, she said softly, if they were nervous, if they cut themselves on the glass, there could be blood. There could be DNA. That word hit me like a bell. DNA. Not a feeling. Not a name. Proof. And my brain did that thing brains do when two loose moments suddenly snapped together. Me in the back hall, 2 days earlier. Charlotte moving fast, eyes wide, hands wrapped around something small and hard inside a folded white cloth, saying nothing as she slipped upstairs. Later that day, a white cloth tossed in the laundry room near the back stairs, the corner nobody cleans because it belongs to dust and secrets. For a second, everything went very loud. My breathing, the birds, the old porch, and then very quiet. I didn't ask permission. Permission had been the problem. I walked home the long way. Side door, low steps. The path the staff takes when they want to disappear. And I slid into my father's office because I knew a cabinet he never used for anything, but hiding things he didn't want to explain. Bottom shelf behind a row of folders that hadn't been opened since the last PR crisis. I reached in, and there it was, the white cloth folded neat like guilt pretending to be clean. I lifted it and saw the stain, not wine, not sauce. That color only means one thing up close. Blood. My hands shook. My brain didn't. I tucked it under my jacket and kept walking. Taxi cash from a birthday card in a drawer. I shouldn't have known about. The driver glancing back only once because I sounded like a kid, trying to sound like a grown-up, and he decided not to care today. Margaret opened her door with those sharp eyes and saw me through the way people see unexpected fireworks, a little afraid, a little impressed, a lot curious. I told her everything quick, not because I was scared. Okay, I was. But because the words were hot and needed air. She took the cloth like it was more than fabric, labeled it, sealed it, called a lab friend who owed her or respected her or both. We'll keep your name out of this, she said, and I nodded, even though being 8 and anonymous is basically the same thing. And then we waited. Waiting is not passive. It's a sport. At home, my father barked orders he called calm leadership staff, moved like choreography, and my sister's bandage kept showing up in the corner of my eye, like a blink. You can't stop. On TV, some local journalists started asking why a trial with no evidence moved at lightning speed, why a judge and a billionaire shared a donor list, whether anyone bothered to check the cameras that mysteriously malfunctioned. Our front doorbell chimed, and a man with a microphone used the words public trust and due process, and I watched my father answer without answering. The art of rich men everywhere. Pattern interrupt. Late that night, I heard Charlotte whisper on the phone, voice shaking, "What if they find out about the cloth?" My pen stopped halfway through a sentence in the little spiral notebook I kept under my mattress, because she had just confessed to the heir. A day later, Margaret texted me one word. Come. I met her in the garden behind her cottage, rosemary and rain, and a table with a folder that looked heavier than paper. She didn't waste time. Female DNA, she said, steady eyes, steady voice, not Emily's. I didn't have words. For a second, I didn't even have breath. The world shifted, Clicked, found a new gear. Proof. We lined up the next steps like dominoes. Chain of custody sworn statement counsel willing to stand up, and we waited for the retrial. Because public pressure can pry open doors, even power thought it nailed shut. The courthouse was a different animal this time. People outside with signs, cameras rolling, a sense that the air itself had a stake. Inside, Judge Howard sat a little too tall, a little too relaxed, like a man who thinks last time's script will work if he speaks faster. My father placed himself in the front row, lawyers on either side, trying to look like a man with nothing to hide and everything under control. Emily came in thinner but unbroken, a new lawyer at her elbow, who actually knew how to ask questions, and my mother took my hand. That squeeze told me everything. She was scared, too. The hearing started like a bad rerun. Objections swatted away, my father's voice smooth as a luxury car ad. And then something in me stood up before my legs did. I want to speak. The judge frowned like I'd tracked mud on the carpet and told me to sit down. I didn't. I have evidence. He started to say no again, and Margaret was on her feet like a metronome of courage. The boy has evidence, and that sentence tilted the room. I walked forward with the bagged cloth and the lab report, hands shaking, voice not. I didn't deliver a speech. I told the path, where I found it, how it was tested, what the report said. The clerk carried it to the bench like it might explode. Reporters leaned in like sunflowers. Margaret took the stand and turned science into a story anyone could follow. Blood tells the truth. Power can't bribe. The cut likely happened. Opening the case, the missing cloth, the timeline, the chain of custody clean. A recess, a call, a stamp, and then the line that turned the whole thing upside down. The DNA belongs to Charlotte Lancaster, my sister. Not a rumor. A fact with a barcode. Silence. Not empty, though. Charged like the moment before thunder. Charlotte stood shaking, and the words spilled. I wasn't trying to steal it. I just wanted to show my friends. I cut my hand. I panicked. I thought it would go away. I didn't know they'd blame Emily. I didn't know Dad would. She stopped when she saw his face. Because in that second, he saw himself too. Not the speeches, not the headlines, just a man who let pride do the thinking and used a system like a hammer. Emily's lawyer moved like water through a cracked dam. Motion to dismiss, immediate release, correction of record. The judge hesitated the way people do when they realize the camera is also a mirror, then granted it. The cuffs came off. The room clapped. Not because anyone said applause, but because sometimes your hands know what justice feels like before your head catches up. My mother cried. I sat hard and let my bones hear my heartbeat. Outside, microphones swarmed. Why did you push this case? Did you influence the judge? Will you compensate Emily? And my father had no words, because silence was the only sentence left that didn't sound like spin. And then the moment that still splits people right down the middle. Emily looked at him, at Charlotte, at me, and said, I forgive you. Do you think that's fair? If it were you, what would you have done? Yeah, the crowd gasped. She had every legal right to take us apart dollar by dollar, headline by headline, and she chose mercy, not forgetting, not excusing, releasing. My father cried, not the loud kind, the quiet kind that makes people look away and then look back because something human just happened. He hugged me like he hadn't in years, turned to Emily, and said, I am sorry, truly, no lawyer whispering in his ear. No cameras demanded, just a sentence that weighed enough to stand on its own. Stick around, because what happened next will blow your mind. Within a week, he stepped down from the company, not a polished exit with soft language, but a statement that used the words responsibility and wrong. He backed an investigation into Judge Howard. Suspension followed. and he announced he would transfer a significant portion of his personal wealth to Emily, not charity, he said correction. Some people praised it, others called it PR with better lighting. And I get that I do, but he declined every interview. He didn't go on morning shows to cry, he just went quiet and showed up someplace small. Emily didn't move into a mansion or buy a diamond big enough to have its own opinion. She rented a plain building with stubborn walls and turned it into a training center for women who needed a hand up that wouldn't turn into a handcuff. Classes, childcare, hot meals, a door that didn't creak with judgment. She named it Oliver's Institute. I went red. She laughed and said the name wasn't about me. It was about reminding people that small voices can tip big rooms if you listen. My father started volunteering there, under a fake name that fooled exactly no one, mopping floors, serving food, stacking chairs, sitting in the back of a class called Ethics and Dignity, while Emily taught about truth and silence and how both can save you or bury you. 1 year later, we threw a little event. Folding chairs, store-brand cookies, balloons that popped if you breathed too hard. And Emily asked me to say a few words. I told them the only thing I was sure of, that justice doesn't come from power. It comes from choosing what's right, even when you're small. The room went quiet in the right way, the kind that lets meaning land. My father stood in the back with his volunteer badge crooked, wiping his eyes when he thought no one was looking. My sister stacked chairs without being asked. Life didn't become a fairy tale. It became honest. Now here's where I'll leave you, with the mess we don't tie in a bow. Was forgiveness the right call? Some of you will say absolutely not. That mercy without consequences invites more harm than a lawsuit could have set a precedent and sent a message with teeth. Others will say forgiveness was the only way to stop the story from becoming another revenge saga where everyone loses a little more of their soul. I live in the uncomfortable middle. I think accountability matters, and I think mercy can be a kind of accountability when it changes what a person does next. My dad gave up power. He didn't trust himself to hold Judge Howard faced a review Charlotte will carry. What she did longer than any headline would have. And Emily built a place where pain turned into purpose. So tell me, do you think that's fair? If you were a Emily, would you forgive, or would you take it to court and ride the system until it finally paid attention? If you were my father, how far would you go to fix what you broke? Money, position, pride? Or would you hire better PR and hope time smoothed the edges? If you were me, 8 years old, with a white cloth pressed under your jacket, like a secret heartbeat, would you have stood up when the judge told you to sit down? Don't just watch and swipe away. Talk to me. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, what moment punched you in the chest, where you disagree with me, where you think we got it wrong or right. Share your own story. A time you were wronged, a time you were wrong and had to own it. And if you believe small courage can move big rooms, share this video with one person who still thinks power and truth are the same thing. Because they're not. And sometimes it takes a kid, a white cloth, and a woman who won't let hate write the ending to prove it.